So I wanted to just start with a couple of things. One is that on most of the slides, I have footnoted the information as to where I got that information at the bottom. So, please check that out. These are all from peer-reviewed scientific research. So it's not just me and in defense of animals saying it, but groups like the EPA and the UN. So check that out. And also, I just want to give a quick disclaimer about the word livestock. I really don't like using that term. I feel that it really doesn't give justice to the living, breathing creatures that animals that are raised for our food are. But unfortunately, the term livestock is used in the scientific literature, so it's going to come up frequently. But I just want to say that I really don't like using that term, but I do because it's what the science says. So there are numerous issues going on and have been for many, many years, and the EPA has been documenting this for a long time with animal agriculture and its impact on the environment. We've got all of these issues going on. I'm going to be able to touch on a few of these, but unfortunately not all of them. It's just such a huge, huge problem. So let's start with the big one. Global warming. Finally, we're waking up to it. I mean, scientists have been crying about this for years, but now it's actually in our neighborhoods, in our communities. We're feeling it in the destructive power of the massive tornadoes and cyclones, all of this happening. And luckily, people are waking up to this. So what do the Pentagon, the World Bank, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and Greenpeace all have in common? Well, the Pentagon and Greenpeace have something in common. They do. They actually believe that global warming is real and that animal agriculture significantly contributes to it. So what is meat's carbon hoofprint? There is numerous studies that are conclusive to it, that it's very impactful. This is the latest. Animal agriculture is actually 51%, releases 51% of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. And this is from two prominent World Bank environmental advisors that did this study. And they actually feel that our current trajectory of going from fossil fuels to renewable energy is just not going to be fast enough. They really recommend a global shift to a plant-based diet because with that, there is no infrastructure change, there's no cost involved. It could happen very quickly, very easily, and reduce emissions extremely more than this current trajectory we're on of switching to renewable energy. So I wonder if we can close that door. It seems like a lot of noise. Yeah, thank you. So here's more evidence from the United Nations. 2010 report, they found, this is the International Panel of Sustainable Resource Management, they strongly urge a global shift to a plant-based diet, both to feed the world as well as to greatly reduce environmental impacts like global warming. So what's going on with this? It's more difficult to gauge the greenhouse gas emissions with animal agriculture. With transportation, it's very easy. We've got, the gas, just to see it, to visualize it. The gas goes into the car gives emissions. The more you drive, the more emissions. It's pretty straightforward. But with animal agriculture, there's all these steps along the way with emissions that are problematic. Come on in and have a seat. So we've got 65% of nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide actually is 310 times more powerful of a heat-trapping gas than carbon dioxide. Okay, and this is coming from animal agriculture. We've got 37%, almost 40% of methane. And methane, again, is a much more powerful heat-trapping gas. We've got 23 times more of the global warming potential of carbon dioxide with methane. There's excessive energy and fossil fuel use. We'll get more into that later, as well as 68% of the ammonia emissions, which is a leading contributor to acid rain, more than 400 other polluting gases, such as hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and then you throw in the destruction of the rainforest, of course, the lungs of our Earth that are carbon sink and pulling carbon from the atmosphere, and you've got a real recipe for destruction. So this is how it works, folks. This is it in action in the field. Yeah. I love that picture. Actually, more of the emissions come through the chewing of the cud and burping, but I just couldn't resist that slide. So anyway. All right. So energy consumption, massive amounts of energy on industrial farming, slaughterhouse, processing plant, all wasted. Indoor environments, the conveyor belts, milking machines, lighting, heating, the mechanized slaughtering process, all of this is very energy intensive and exclusive to animal agriculture. Transportation, again, there's many more steps. Grain brought to the animals, animals brought to auction, animals to slaughter, carcass to processing, product to market. There's so many more steps. You compare that to organic plant farming, where you've got the farm to the farmer's market, or the farm to the processing plant to the grocery, but there's still less steps in the transportation factor. Go ahead. Fossil fuel. So it takes 8 times as much fossil fuel to produce animal foods as it takes to produce plant food. And even the least efficient plant food is nearly 10 times as efficient as the most energy intensive or efficient, animal food. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say you're at the store and you're shopping and you've got this tomato. It's a conventional tomato that came from Brazil. And you're like, oh my gosh, so much transportation. It came from so far away. It must have a really heavy environmental impact. I'll bet this organic local dairy has less of environmental impact. Not at all. There's heavy production that goes into that local organic dairy product, and you'll find that conventional plant foods actually have less of an impact. And I'll get more into that in a further slide, but let's move on. So a study at the University of Chicago found that consuming no animal products is 50% more effective at fighting global warming than switching from a standard car to a hybrid. So even more evidence. So you can kind of look at it this way. This is a fun analogy. We've got meat-centered diet, kind of like driving an SUV. Vegetarian diet, a little better, mid-sized car, but vegan can be equivalent to walking or biking in your reduction of impact. So it's a really huge factor in your carbon footprint. So to wrap up the global warming part, we can all go get Hummers. No, of course I don't recommend a Hummer, but I love this slide. Had to throw that in. Okay, so other issues. We've got a real waste of resources. We often think of humans as being the overpopulated species, consuming all the resources, which, is arguably true. However, we really need to look to these animals that we are raising for our food, the billions and billions of animals. They are truly the overpopulated species consuming up resources. The livestock population on average outweighs the U.S. population by about 5 times. For every 1 kilogram of animal protein produced, livestock are fed about 6 kilograms of protein. And at present, the U.S. livestock population consumes more than 7 times as much grain as is consumed directly by the entire American population, enough to feed the entire human population of that country 5 times. And this falls into the next slide, which is about world hunger. Now, this could be a whole other presentation. And unfortunately, I only have the time to dedicate one slide to it, but I think this is really telling. The amount of grain that's fed to U.S. livestock is sufficient to feed about 840 million people who follow a plant-based diet. Meanwhile, an estimated 854 million people around the world remain undernourished. I think it's really startling how close these numbers are. Okay, so land use and habitat destruction, all of these things going on. Again, I wish I could get deeper into it, but we'll touch on a few things. Go ahead, yes. Deforestation. Right now in the Amazon, cattle ranching is the primary reason for deforestation. And, that meat, of course, is not being eaten by the people of the Amazon. Where is it coming? It's coming up to the first world. And it's not only for grazing, but also for the raising of the grains. So there's, numerous acres that are being cut. And of course, the Amazon is, like I said before, the lungs of the earth. This is where we absorb carbon from the atmosphere. So we're doubly hurting ourselves by cutting the Amazon as far as greenhouse gas goes. So land use. Large-scale dietary change could actually, to a plant-based diet, could actually reverse deforestation. In the U.S., over 400 million acres of pasture and rangeland could be reforested, and hundreds of millions of additional acres going to grow the feed for the livestock, all of that could be reforested as well. So we could be actually creating forest that sinks, that pulls that carbon out of the atmosphere. Go ahead. Habitat and species loss. Lost my place. Here we go. All right. So not something you think about, really, when you're thinking about the impact of animal agriculture or your diet or meat, right? Livestock now account for about 20% of the total terrestrial animal biomass and occupy a space that was once habitat to wildlife. Globally, livestock production is one of the leading causal factors in the loss of biodiversity and a key factor in a loss of species. Within certain regions in the U.S., livestock grazing is listed as the #1 cause of species being federally listed as threatened or endangered. So, and then livestock exclusion, getting the cows out of the streams, has consistently resulted in the most dramatic and rapid rates of ecosystem recovery. So there's a lot going on there. Don't have the time to really get into it. I hope this gives you a taste of what's happening. Oh, actually, well, that's okay. I did want to just talk about predator control really quick. Poisoning, trapping, shooting of predators around livestock and ranches. Ranchers can call a service called Wildlife Services, which is funded by our government. They don't pay a thing. And these wildlife services will come out and poison, trap, shoot any predator that's in the area. Doesn't even have to have affected any of his livestock. And of course, with poisons and traps, there's non-target species that get caught in the traps, birds, mothers that can't get back to the den to their babies and their babies starve. I mean, it's really a horrible, horrible thing on wildlife. And we've had a war on wildlife since livestock have been the #1 in our country. Okay, water. Again, a precious natural resource that we are really squandering. So there's two issues going on with water. We've got the excessive water use going in and then the pollution coming out the other end. Okay, so we'll talk about excessive water use. Irrigation is really where our water is going. Most agricultural irrigation is also used for animal feed. But most of the world's water is used for irrigation. Agriculture, including livestock production, consumes more fresh water than any other activity in the United States. So when we're thinking about, cutting back on our water use and, I'm going to shower shorter and, not water in the mornings, so it doesn't evaporate, all of that, yeah, that's great. However, the majority of the water is going to agriculture. Western agriculture irrigation accounts for 85% of the fresh water consumed. Nationwide, groundwater withdrawals are about 3.5 times larger than withdrawals from the public supply. And most of that is going to be used for livestock. Okay? Producing 1 kilogram of animal protein requires about 100 times more water than producing 1 kilogram of grain protein. You can also look at it this way. 16 pounds of grain equals about 1 pound of meat. Now think about a family of 4. 16 pounds of grain. And that could feed that family for a week. 1 pound of meat, that's 1 meal for that family. There's also watering the livestock, washing the factory equipment, a dairy operation utilizing an automatic flushing system, which is a new way of getting the water out and all the manure out, can use up to 150 gallons of water per cow per day. Huge amounts of water wasted. Go ahead. So how much water can you save on the plant-based diet? Meat-centered diet uses about 4,000 gallons of water. Vegetarian diet, 1,200, little better. Vegan diet, pure plant-based diet, only 300 gallons of water. So a huge savings in water. You can also look at it this way. 2,500 gallons of water can give you 100 pounds of potatoes. Again, that's a lot of food. It's a lot of hash browns, right? 50 pounds of fruit or only 1 pound of meat. Huge waste of water. And then we got a problem coming out the other end, okay, with water pollution. So we've got... in developing and emerging countries, livestock production is perhaps the leading source of water pollution. Water pollution and ammonia emissions, mainly from livestock production, are compromising biodiversity, often drastically in the case of aquatic life. Animal feedlots create more water pollution than factory and sewage treatment plants, and there's no, wastewater management, no, processing of this water. It just goes straight into the ground and into our waterways. So how much waste are we talking about? It's a lot. The waste produced by one dairy cow, it's equal to that of 20 to 40 people. So we're talking a lot of shit, right? One dairy farm with 2,500 cows produces as much waste as a city of around 411,000 residents. Okay, and the livestock of the U.S. produces 20 times as much excrement as the entire human population of the country. Okay, and where's it all going? It's going into our waterways and into our streams, lakes, oceans, and it's creating eutrophication, which is oxygen-depleted water. It depletes the oxygen in the water. Okay, so in North America, 28% of our lakes are eutrophic. The second largest zone of coastal hypoxia, which is oxygen-depleted water in the world, is found at the Gulf of Mexico, right at the outflow of the Mississippi River, where all that livestock, all of that animal agriculture production comes down the Mississippi. Pesticides are also a problem with eutrophication. And so this 20,000 square kilometer region is referred to as the dead zone. Nothing can live in this water. Fish swim in and start to suffocate and lose consciousness and die. It's horrible. So this is a waste lagoon. This is how the industry tries to contain the waste, usually on hog farms, dairy facilities. This is a plastic-lined, acres of area that they're, trying to contain the liquid waste. I have a couple of notes on it here. Yeah, it can be, I'm sorry, go back. Just real quick. They can be 18 acres, 25 feet deep. This is where a lot of that evaporated greenhouse gases are coming from: nitrous oxide, methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia. 55% of these things have leakage problems. When there's heavy rain, it overflows. It's leaching viruses, bacteria, antibiotics, growth hormones, nitrates, heavy metals, all into the local water system. So I want to talk about fishing. I think it's, the fish situation is absolutely dire and something we must talk about when we talk about our food and environmental impact. I went snorkeling and noticed how gently the fish welcomed us into their world as compared with the violence in which we welcomed them into ours. I became a vegetarian. I just love that quote. So going on, so overfishing. So what's happening now is that these big trawlers are going out and they are dropping miles and miles and miles of netting. They're pulling all of the sea life up into the boat. They pick out about 20% that they can sell, and then they throw the rest back dead. So we are really, really devastating our oceans. All 17 of the world's major fishing estuaries are overfished. 7 of the top 10 marine fish species are fully exploited or overexploited. And nearly 90% of all large predatory fish in the ocean are now gone, forcing nations to increasingly fish down the food web to meet seafood demands. Another state of the world fisheries and aquaculture study by the UN, they concluded that 80% of all marine fish stocks are currently fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted, including stocks of the 7 largest prey fisheries. Bykill, that's what I was talking about, where they throw back so much dead. More than 7 million tons of so-called bycatch, that's what they call it, but I like the term bykill, which is much more accurate because it is all dead, gets thrown back. Over 300,000 sea animals, such as non-target fish species, sea turtles, dolphins, whales, sharks, albatrosses, and other seabirds. For every pound of shrimp netted in the Gulf of Mexico, 4 pounds, I'll just read it here. For every pound of shrimp netted in the Gulf of Mexico, 4 pounds of bycatch is wasted and thrown back overboard dead. Go ahead. And endangered species are starving without enough to eat and caught in these fishing nets and killed. Sea turtles are killed by the shrimping industry by the hundreds of millions. Go ahead. And if that wasn't bad enough, half of the world's fish catch is fed to livestock. In fact, more fish are consumed by U.S. livestock by the entire human population of all of Western Europe countries combined. What a waste. And this is another interesting point. Now we're finding that actually overfishing is linked to climate change. Fish droppings, the sea being dispersed with fish droppings, actually absorbs the carbon in the ocean, right? And because we've had this massive reduction of fish, there's not as much fish droppings, we're actually hastening global warming with our overfishing. So I do want to touch quickly on organic. What about organic? So the only difference, like for organic animal agriculture, I hear a lot of people say, oh, but I eat organic meat or I drink organic dairy. Well, the only difference really is that the grain fed to the animals is organic and the animals are essentially drug-free. But all the other environmental destructions I mentioned, greenhouse gas emissions, fossil fuel, forest, water waste, all of these still apply to organic agriculture. Going on, what about local? It's not his fault. I have so many people say, I hate the cows. I hate what's going on with the cows. It's not their fault. It's our fault. Okay. So animal products or local animal products are not entirely local or environmentally sound. A food's carbon footprint, the transportation is only about 11% of the equation. You have to look at the production phase. 83% of the equation of the food's carbon footprint. Now, going back to that tomato and the local dairy product I was talking about, this is what I'm talking about. So even though that tomato had to come all the way from Brazil, still you have to look at the production phase. There was no production that went into this tomato. It was picked, put in a box, and shipped. With the dairy, there's so much more that goes into it, all those stages. I don't have time to get into all this. Suffice it to say that, that we import more grain than we export. This is what the dairy cows are eating, and obviously, we don't in local dairy, clover dairy. We're not growing all that right around the dairy. There's just lots of in transportation. Anyway, greenhouse gas emissions, all of that. So that's okay. Go ahead. I'm running out of time, so I want to skip on. Study of the journal Environmental Science Technology found switching just 2 meals a week from meat and dairy to a vegetable-based diet actually achieves more greenhouse gas reductions than buying all locally sourced food. So it's way more important than local. Free range, it's just really, really impossible to have all the farmed animals that we have truly be free range and feed everyone on the planet. We just don't have the space. Animals raised for food right now occupy 80% of the Earth's total arable, land, the usable land, right? To free range a cow, it takes 2 to 20 acres of land. We just don't have it. We just don't have it. There's no way. Grass-fed beef can actually produce 50 to 60% more greenhouse gases, too. So grass-fed is absolutely not the answer. Okay, going on. So conventional plant food has far less environmental damage than organic, local animal food. Now, of course, the ideal is organic, local plant food, and I absolutely encourage that, but just a taste. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so wrapping it up with some amazing statistics. If everyone went vegetarian just for one day, okay, and the U.S. would prevent greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to 1.2 million tons of CO2, as much as is produced by all of France. This is one day. 3 million tons of soil erosion and the $70 million of resulting economic damages, 4.5 million tons of animal excrement, and almost 7 tons of ammonia emissions. And if that wasn't enough, go back. There was 2 of those. Yeah, okay. If everyone went vegetarian just for one day, the U.S. would save 100 billion gallons of water, enough to supply all the homes of New Mexico for almost 4 months, 1.5 billion pounds of crops otherwise fed to livestock, enough to feed the state of New Mexico for more than a year, 70 million gallons of gas, enough to fuel all the cows of Canada and Mexico combined with plenty to spare, 3 million acres of land, an area more than twice the size of Delaware, and 33 tons of antibiotics. That's one day in the U.S. of everyone being vegetarian. So, in conclusion, eating vegan is eating green. Choosing a plant-based diet is one of the most powerful things you can do to help save the planet. Thank you. So thank you. So I don't know if there's time for questions. I don't know if that's probably not. Okay. Well, if you have some questions, I'll be around.